Firstly, the power generated from 1.3 billion people's desire to win their own liberty and democracy. And secondly, the power generated from several billion people's hope to see China moving toward democracy. If we can make these two great powers work together, then we can exert pressure from inside and outside to force CCP to democratize. We also believe that the best way to unite these two great powers is to build a bridge for these two great powers to communicate and get better mutual understanding. And even eventually, they can work together. Just like Dr. Shah said earlier. That's why we have two groups of people here. One group is the activists in the movement. Other group, the great scholars, especially international scholars. If we can sit in one room, we two group of people discuss and provide a bridge between the people from Chinese people, the power from Chinese people, and the power from the international society. And this is exactly our purpose to establish China Democracy Forum, because we want China Democracy Forum to serve as a bridge to bridge the two great powers. We always invite overseas Chinese scholars and our comrades in the movement to our seminars because we believe Chinese scholars and our activists, we believe they know Chinese people better. And we also invite international scholars to our seminars because we all know they are much more influential than we are to the international academic circle or policymakers. What I said above just follows a very simple and straightforward logic. But when we turn around and look at this world of reality today, we can see many countries develop their policies confronting each other. They confront themselves. Let's take USA as an example. When USA recognized PRC government through normalization 40 years ago, USA drew for China a picture of peaceful transformation, so to speak, to guide China on path which will make China go toward democracy step by step. USA's plan to urge China government to democratize is for sure welcomed and appreciated by all Chinese people. But in 2011, USA started executing the so-called Pivot to Asia policy, which is later on changed to rebalance to Asia Pacific. With this policy, USA on one hand remained silent when Japan declared their sovereignty on Senkaku's Islands. But on the other hand, USA instigated Vietnam and Philippines to challenge China's for sovereignty on South China Sea. So pivot to Asia policy not only provoked PRC government, provoked all Chinese over the whole world. I have dedicated myself in China's democratization movement for 30 years. In the past, we all know USA government policy is supportive to China's democratization movement. So we always consider USA as our strongest ally. But since USA started Pivot to Asia policy, I have to say I absolutely disagree with this policy. Because if I do, I literally betrayed my own people and violate the international righteousness. Because Pivot to Asia policy is very clear. It's a lie. It violates international righteousness. So today I make it clear beforehand, our purpose to found China Democracy Forum is not just to hold conferences to please USA government or to please Taiwan government to get a little subsidy. If we take that idea as our purpose, we are actually humiliating ourselves. So before I close my speech, I want to emphasize again, the purpose of China Democracy Forum is to bridge two great powers, which are power from Chinese people and power from international society, to make them work together to promote China's democratization. And our responsibility is to honestly speak out for Chinese people and make it known to the whole world what Chinese people want and what they have been fighting for. And I apologize for my lengthy opening speech. And I thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you. So now we turn to our keynote speaker, Professor Arthur Watson. And let me say a few words about Professor Watson. And Professor Watson is a specialist. Okay, yeah, so we have a picture. Professor Watson, his Chinese name is Lin Wei. May I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Lin Wei is given.
Lin is because Waldron, W-A-L-D, is German for forest.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would be Mr. Hua Delong.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't want to be Mr. Hua Delong.
Yeah.
But it's my first teacher.
Okay. And Professor Watson is a Lauder Professor of International Relations at the University of Pennsylvania. And he, you see, got all his degrees from Harvard University. And he has written the very famous book, The Great War of China, From History to Myth, and also How the Peace Was Lost, and From War to Neoliberalism, China's Turning Point, 1924-1925. And also he has been an editor and a contributor and to dozens of books. 林蔚教授是从宾夕法尼亚大学来的，那么他是个历史学教授，那么他是宾夕法尼亚大学的那个就是卓越的就是教授，是做国际关系的。那么他的最有名的书是叫《长城》。那么这样他会给我们一个就是主题演讲。那么这个主题演讲呢，应该呢是大概在10分钟左右，但是我们是给的是30分钟的时间，所以的话呢，我就想他演讲以后呢，我就把这个演讲全部翻成中文，这样的话有助于就是我们在座的每一位的那个理解，好不好？ Yeah. So how about you give speech and if you think it's right for me to you stop, I can translate the.
So I'll just stop every now and then and translate.
And whichever you feel comfortable.
I think that's better.
Okay, thank you. So please.
Well, good morning, my dear friends. It's a great honor to be here. The first demonstration against the dictatorship in China took place outside of the Chinese consulate in New York more than 30 years ago. I knew that it was going to happen, so I went there. There was nobody else. There were no press. It was just me sitting in a cafe. About 12 people appeared wearing grocery bags over their heads. And they unfurled banners saying, "Democracy for China." The consulate was absolutely silent, you know, the windows sealed. But I said to myself, you have just seen the beginning of a river that is going to grow and grow and grow. And I think I'm right. Translate.
30年以前，我在纽约的总领事馆，那么看到了一个就是一群人呢在这个游行，在示威。那么其实呢也没有其他人，我是唯一的一个旁观者。那么他们呢在就是示威的时候抗议的时候呢，用就是购物袋了，把他们的头套起来，然后呢展示出标语了，就是中国自由。那么当时呢我在那边呢，那么我就意识到了，那么这只是一个河流的开端。那么这一个伟大的河流呢，那么民主会从这儿开始。
Thank you. Since July 9th of last year, more than 250 Chinese human rights lawyers have been abducted by the authorities in Beijing, and most have been incarcerated for terms of 10 years or beyond. One is Xie Yang, who was abducted in Changsha, July 11th last year. He was tortured in the hope that he would confess, but now it looks as if he's going to be detained in prison for a very long time.
自从去年的7.9事件以后，那么有至少250名的那个人权律师呢，他们被那个逮捕。那么他们被那个北京政权呢，那个给逮捕，然后给关押了起来。那么而且那个关押的这个判决的刑期呢，那么超过10年或者是甚至10年以上。那么其中呢有一个律师就叫谢阳，那么他是长沙的律师谢阳。那么他在那个就是去年的7月11号呢，那么被那个就是逮捕，而且呢他受到了那个酷刑，因为呢人们呢就是那个当局呢希望呢能够从他的那个口中呢得到这个就是供词或者是认错，但是呢目前来看呢，他可能会被关押那个很长的一段时间。
Here is what Xie told the Beijing agents as they threatened him, quote, "I will not confess. I will not confess because these 2 charges against me are spurious. I will never dismiss my own lawyers, and I want to meet with my lawyers according to normal procedure. I hope that more lawyers will take part in my case."
就是北京的这个就是公安人员呢，那么威胁他了。那么这是就是律师就是谢阳了，怎么样告诉北京的公安人员的？这是我的这个引用的他的话。他说我绝不会就是认错，因为呢，所有的这2个就是罪名呢都是荒谬的，而且呢我也绝不会呢就是放弃了就是用我的律师。那么我呢那个要根据那个正当的法律程序来那个就是和我的律师会面。那么我希望呢，那么有更多的律师呢会来那个就是参与我的案子。
He and those like him, even in prison, represent something new and important for PRC. A class of fearless people who are not frightened and refuse to lie has appeared. They cannot be intimidated and they cannot be bought.
这谢阳律师和那些像他一样的，那么现在已经身陷囹圄，那么他们呢那个是代表就是未来的中国了，那么一些新的和最重要的一些发展。那么有一批那些无畏的这些人呢，那么他们呢再也不被吓倒，而且他们呢拒绝去撒谎。那么他们呢现在已经出现了，他们呢是不会被吓怕的，而且也不能够被收买。
My argument this morning is that they are writing the future of China, that great civilization.
我今天上午的那个观点是了，那么他们正在书写中国的未来，那个伟大文明的中国的未来。
We must keep these people always in our minds, tens of thousands of them. We must keep lists. We must raise names and wrongs at every opportunity, and we must never forget.
我们必须把这些人呢一直记在我们的心中。那么他们呢有成千上万。那么我们必须呢不断的就是那个开列出这些被囚禁的律师的名单。那么在每时每刻呢都要提起他们的名字，那么揭露这些就是冤案，而绝不要去忘却。
In the pitch black of a prison basement, hungry, shackled, attacked by rats and vermin, just to stay sane is a challenge. But if you know that thousands of people outside have you constantly in mind and in the public eye, your hope will not die.
在大牢的深黑暗处，那么我们有看到这些 受饥挨饿，那么披戴镣铐的这些人呢，他们还不断的受着老鼠和蚊虫的各种折磨和袭击。那么我们知道了，成千上万的人们呢，那么如果我们在外面的话呢，如果我们能够就是你知道外面的世界，如果有千千万万的人还不断的惦记着你的话呢，那么而且呢，你还在公众的视线内关怀之中，那么无论如何的话呢，你的希望呢就不会泯灭。那么因此呢，就说我们知道，就说在监狱里面要保持一个清醒的头脑都是一个挑战。但是呢，如果我们能够继续的记住他们，把他们保持在公众的关注之中的话，他们呢就会一直维持他们的希望。
Let me now turn to the People's Republic of China, 76 years old and 1 day today, an aspiring great power.
对，今天呢正好是中华人民共和国的就是诞生76周年加1天了。那么所以呢，这是一个雄心勃勃的一个大国了。那么现在呢，就让我转到就是讨论中华人民共和国。
China has decided, I think under Hu Jintao, to abandon her tactical military connection with the United States and to become flagship of dictatorship, oppose the United States and oppose other free countries. China now has the largest military forces in the world, equipped with technology that is often as good as anybody's, as ours, and they have decided that they have no need for the United States to counterbalance the Soviet Union, gone a quarter of a century.
我认为在胡锦涛执政的期间呢，中国已经抛弃了与我国与美国那么建立的就是军事策略上的合作关系，那么而成为了一个就是专制就是体制这一个舰队的这个旗舰。那么中国呢，那么它有世界上最大的一个军队，而且呢它的技术呢，那么经常呢还可以跟我们自己的就是技术媲美。那么现在呢已经呢做下如此判断，他们已经不需要美国来。对不起，对他们是不需要美国来就是平衡苏联了，因为苏联呢，已经在1/4世纪以前呢就已经消失掉了。
Democracy is not something new and alien to the Chinese, who some foreigners think of as natural slaves, who need a master, or as they say in Russian, a hozyain, a boss. My dear younger son has returned from the politically intense Princeton in Beijing summer program, unhappy at the attempt to brainwash him, but convinced that democracy in China would mean chaos, which is the party line.
民主其实对中国呢，并不是新鲜的东西，也并不陌生，也并不是说它完全呢是由外国人呢把它给就是带到中国的，而中国人呢是天然的这种奴隶，他们需要一个主人，或者用俄国的话来说，俄语来说，那么就是需要一个就是老板。那么我的亲爱的次子了，那么他在政治非常影响非常严重的普林斯顿的北京夏季培训项目。那么他在那里边呢，他非常不高兴那里边从事的某种洗脑，但是呢，他回来了还继续说中国人呢真的不能有民主，因为有了民主，中国就会乱，而这恰好是党的这个路线。
In fact, China has had elections from roughly from the turn of the last century, from 1900 onward. A parliament into the 1920s, whose building can still be seen in Beijing. In 1946, a truly democratic constitution. In 1947, local elections. And in the following years, national elections. Yes, pre-communist China was not entirely stable. But she was like a rock of stability compared to the People's Republic, where more than 50 million people have died in peacetime and good weather.
事实上呢，在那个19世纪进入20世纪的那段时间呢，中国就已经开始了选举，而且在20年代呢，也建立了自己的议会，而且现在它的议会大厦呢，我们其实还可以在北京呢可以找到。那么中国呢，在1946年呢，已经那个制定了一个真正的民主的一个宪法。那么而且在1947年呢，那么地方的选举呢，也已经开始那个进行，而且在第2年呢，还进行了全国的选举。那么当然了，我并不是说那个共产党之前的中国，那么是完全的稳定的。但是呢，我们如果把它给中华人民共和国来相比较的话呢，在没有就是战乱，也就是在和平时期和在有那个就是气候都还非常好的情况下呢，那么中华人民共和国呢，就使得那个就是5000万的人呢，那么至少5000万的人呢，那么那个死亡，那么所以如此相比的话呢，其实共产党之前的中国呢，其实还是稳如磐石。
Even Mao Zedong pretended to be a Democrat, and he fooled many Chinese and most Americans who studied China.
即便毛泽东呢，他也装着他是一个民主主义者，那么而且呢，他那个欺骗了许多的中国人，而且我还可以说呢，他欺骗了绝大多数研究中国的美国人。
On September 27th, 1945, Mao Zedong provided written and therefore presumably definitive answers to written questions posed by the Reuters correspondent in Chongqing. One was, what is the Chinese Communist definition for a free democratic China?
在1945年9月27号了，那个毛泽东呢，当时应路透社驻重庆记者的这个书面的一个问题的这个就是提问呢，那么毛泽东呢，那么回答了就是也是书面的回答了，那么所以我们就可以说应该是非常正式的那么一种那个界定。那么这个问题就是说，对中国共产党来说，那么什么是一个自由民主的中国？
Mao answered that, quote, a free democratic China would be a country in which all ranks of government, including the central government, would be produced by popular, judicious, and anonymous voting, and the country would realize the of the people, by the people, for the people concept of Abraham Lincoln. I add, he also said the Sanminjuyi and the four freedoms proposed by Franklin Roosevelt.
对，毛泽东呢这样回答的。他说，一个自由民主的中国呢，那么就是这么一个国家呢，那里边呢，各级政府是由选举产生，那么包括中央政府，而且是由普遍的、公平的和不记名的投票选举产生。那么这个国家呢，那么将会实现呢，就是一个民有、民享、民有、民治、民享的政府。而且是一个三民主义的政府，那么而且是一个罗斯福的4大自由的政府，也就是自由言论、自由敬拜、免于恐惧的自由和免于匮乏的自由。
This exchange was published, of course, in the papers at the time, but it is not included in the Chinese edition of Mao's complete works, although it is included in the Japanese edition of Mao's complete works. So you will say strict control of information. But one of the things I love about China is they screw up all the time. If you go to Baidu and you look this up, the whole thing pops right up on your computer. So, what kind of dictatorship is that?
对，那么这个就是问题了，这个就是讨论呢，那么是发表在当时的这个报纸上的。 那么当然了，他没有这个收入到后来的毛泽东的选集之中，但是呢，日本人呢那个把他给那个找出来。
是他毛泽东的全集。
毛泽东选集。
Yeah, his complete work.
所以在毛泽东的全集里边呢也没有收录。那么但是呢，就是说日本人呢把它给那个就是发现了啊，所以在日本人的这个就是文件里面都有。那么而且很有意思的是什么呢？它这就是为什么呢？我非常的喜欢那个中国这个国家呢，非常有意思。那么很多东西都显得很混乱。那么如果你现在呢，就是我感到非常欣慰。如果你现在到百度去搜索的话，结果你会发现这篇文章。那么所以呢，就说尽管中国呢是有那个强制的就是控制信息了，但是呢，他说这个文件呢，马上这个就可以出来，你可以看到。
Today, the People's Republic has decided to abandon even talk of liberalization. She wants a party dictatorship without end, and she has no interest in the United States or in the free world.
今天呢，中华人民共和国甚至抛弃了自由化的这个有关的讨论。那么他呢那个就是完全想要一个没有任何目标的一党专制。那么而且他认为呢，现在呢他已经对美国呢已经可以不感兴趣了。
Now we Americans do not yet entirely recognize this change of course in China. We are all, as it were, followers of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great 19th century American philosopher. We believe that other cultures will understand our gestures as we mean them. Our hand proffered for a handshake, our attempt to walk a mile in their shoes, our gestures of restraint will signal desire for peace and understanding, even friendship. That is the message we are trying to send.
但是我们美国人呢，那么却没有认识到，那么这种中国呢已经做出的这个转变这个事情发展的这个方向。那么我们呢，那个就是从某种意义上来说，我们都像是爱默生的这个徒弟了。那么因为我们相信呢，那么其他的文化对我们的理解了，就主要是基于我们怎么样显示所展现出的。如果我们把我们手伸出去的话呢，那么我们就是想来给大家握手。那么如果我们那个踏进别人的这个就是鞋子里边呢，去跟着他们一起走的话呢，那么如果我们呢就是显示出我们的自我克制的话呢，那么对其他民族来说呢，文化来说呢，应该说是传递出一个什么信息呢？传递出我们渴望和平和理解。那么而且可能还是我们渴望友谊。那么这就是我们呢试图传递的这么一个信息。
Now, how does the Chinese government receive this? They do not receive the message as we intended, but they as the opposite.
那么中国人是怎么样就是解读我们的这个信息的呢？那么其实呢，根本就不是以我们那个想象的，我们想就是表达的那个这样的去理解，而且恰好他们把那个理解成完全相反了。
The official Chinese reaction will be, we have successfully intimidated Washington to the point that she will not even mention us. The Americans are weak, irresolute, and craven. We can deal with them and we can drive them out of Asia. Compromise is a very scarce concept in Chinese theories of conflict. The phrase the Chinese use is 你死我活, you die, I live. This is not win-win, as we Americans often say. We do not understand the culturally determined difference between the message sent and the message received.
这里边呢，我引用就是中国官方的这个说辞了，就是我们呢已经非常成功的就是那个吓怕了就是美国人了。那么现在呢，他们已经到了如此地步了，那么基本上呢都不愿意呢提起我们了。他们呢其实很软弱，那么很那个就是无决断。那么其实经常是呢，他们呢 说到底就是一个懦夫。那么我们呢，可以呢就是跟他们打交道，而且我们可以呢把他们给赶出亚洲。那么妥协了，那么基本上是中国就是冲突理论里边很少用的一个词汇。那么相反呢，他们经常用的词汇就是说你死我活。那么当然这不是一个双赢的这么一个就是这么一个结局。那么我们呢其实呢并不理解了。那么在这里边呢这里边就是说我们的这个信息了，我们传递出去的这个就是信息了，和他们那边就是所谓收到的我们的信息了，其实这里边呢有一个文化的差异了，造成了这种误会。
Furthermore, China's rulers suffer from the dangerous delusion that the Communist Party can maintain stable and continuing control over China by use of terror and arrests at home, combined with red carpet welcomes and intimidation abroad.
对中国的统治者呢，应该说是在经历着某种危险的一种幻觉。那么他们呢相信呢，就是说共产党呢是可以维持稳定，和就是继续的统治的，那么继续可以统治中国的。只要呢他们凭借着就是在家里边呢，那么行使恐怖和逮捕，那么在国外呢再搞一点就是红地毯的欢迎仪式，那么和就是恐吓。
Now let me conclude with my deepest worry, which is the acceptance and normalization, as it were, of the largest and longest-lived and hideously oppressive People's Republic of China.
OK， 那我现在就是想那个做个结论了。那么我的最深的这么一个担忧，那么就是什么呢？就是我们呢那个面对的这个世界上最大的，而且生存最久的，那么这个非常就是残暴的这么一个中华人民共和国呢，我们现在呢已经接受它了，而且我们把它给常态化了，认为这是正常的这个一部分。
For instance, His Holiness the Dalai Lama comes to America and he goes into the White House past the garbage cans, and he does not go into the Oval Office. Winston Churchill might have said, "We are the United Bloody States of America." In other words, we're a great power. We are a superpower, and our ideas, if not our actions, always, are of sublime goodness. So since when does Beijing get to tell us how to receive our guests? We should tell them, write a protest, hand it to our Deputy Under Assistant Secretary, and we will file it. And the Dalai Lama should go in through the front door and into the Oval Office.
对，这里面有个例子，就是达赖喇嘛尊者了，那么到那个就是白宫去访问了，那么他必须要经过一个垃圾桶，但是呢没有进入到那椭圆办公室。那么我们呢就像丘吉尔讲的，我们是美利坚呢这个就是血色的一个共和国，我们有力量，那么我们有就是我们的理念呢。如果就是并不是我们的行动、我们的理念或者那个就是力量的话了，其实呢是我们什么是我们的理念那个力量和理念呢？其实就是我们的那个崇高的这么一个善意。他说，如果那个北京呢那个就是能够就是那个指手画脚，叫我们怎么样来接待我们的贵宾的话了，他说我们就应该告诉他们。那么你如果不满意的话，那你就提个抗议，那么交给我们的那个就是国务院的帮办，那么我们可以把它给归档。
Now, since 2009, Liu Xiaobo has been in prison in Liaoning province. I believe that the United States should say to China that until he is released, we will have no high-level exchanges. No visits from the Chinese president. Our president doesn't go over there. Because all the work of diplomacy can be done by ambassadors. Ambassadors can handle the whole thing. The rest of this is fluff. Just tell them, look, if you want to come and have a red carpet dinner at the White House, you're going to have to release some people. Otherwise, we can wait.
对，自从2009年刘晓波被捕以后呢，那么其实呢，我们应该呢采取一个政策，就是说，如果你不释放刘晓波的话呢，那我们就不应该有高层护法，也不应该有红地毯。因为呢，我们很多的实际的工作了，可以由我们大使了，那么这样正常的来就是进行。那么所有这些红地毯呢，那么这些仪式呢，其实都只是花絮。所以我们就告诉他们说，如果不释放刘晓波的话呢，那么我们就没有这些所有的花絮。
But that is not the approach. The White House has just told the Pentagon secretly to stop speaking about China's military.
但是呢，这并不是华盛顿在这样做了。那么我们也知道，白宫呢已经告诉了五角大楼，那么当然是悄悄的说，你不要再继续提中国不断增加的军事力量。
Chinese money has infiltrated our system in staggering quantities. One of my colleagues is tracing this money and how much of it goes to our so-called scholars, think tanks, foundations, etc. And it is frightening. These people are taking money from China in large quantities, millions and millions of dollars, and they are being bought. There's no question, they are being bought. And this is a free country. We're not for sale.
那么中国的金钱呢，已经渗透到了我们的体制了，应该说是以惊人的数量渗透到我们的体制。那么我有一个同事呢，就专门在做研究了，那么就在追踪了。到底就是有多少我们所谓的学者，那么智库，他们呢从中国呢拿钱，那么然后呢，他们呢，其实呢，在知识上啊，在思想上啊，都完全已经被收买。我们当然是一个自由的国家，但是呢，多大的程度上，我们的就是知识和我们的思想，那么已经被收买。
But the best deception is self-deception. Our current China policy comes from Henry Kissinger, a man who is totally ignorant of the real China. The real China. He's totally ignorant. Zhou Enlai, he almost worshipped. And he trusted Zhou completely.
所以呢，最好的欺骗当然就是自我欺骗。那么我们迄今的就是当下的中国政策呢，来自于亨利基辛格。那么亨利基辛格呢，其实是一个完全不懂中国的人。那么他呢是完全是相信就是周恩来，而且他是非常的尊重周恩来。
We have now proved scholar diplomat Jay Taylor, working through Taiwan, and myself working through China, we have shown that all of the ultra-secret China policy that Kissinger secretly confided to Zhou Enlai was in fact shared immediately from about 1969 on with Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan. And it was discussed. Zhou and Jiang had discussions about how to handle this American approach. This is an astonishing discovery. But the thing is, we never even suspected that the Chinese might be that smart.
我们现在已经有足够的证据了，证明呢。那么像有一个学者和外交官叫杰伊泰勒。那么他呢，就是在台湾呢这边呢，就是在做研究，而我呢，那么是主要是做中国方面的研究。那么我们呢，就是发现呢， 那么所有的非常绝密的这些中国政策了，那么基辛格了告诉给周恩来的，在70年代了，那么其实很快的，那么他马上呢就给那个国民党那边呢，就是蒋介石了，台湾那边呢就已经去讨论过了。那么所以呢，从1969年以后了，那么一直是这样的情况。那么这是一个非常惊人的一个发现，但是呢，我们却从来没有去怀疑过，那么这种事情会发生。
And I should say this is absolutely certain. It's absolutely certain. It's confirmed in Taiwan, and it has been confirmed to me by Chinese who are authoritative. Some people doubt it, but this is definitely true.
对，我想那个强调了，这是绝对的是真的。那么有那个我们的研究在台湾呢得到了证实，而且呢在中国呢这边也有权威的人士呢，那也向我呢就是肯定的证实了。那么这个就是事情呢是绝对真实的。
Two of the people who went with Kissinger in 1971 I have talked to, and they believe this. Mr. Kissinger has never answered any of my very polite notes and indirect inquiries.
有2位呢曾经给基辛格工作的人呢，那么其实呢已经被我就是那个说服了，他们相信。那么而我呢，那个向基辛格呢那个传递了非常有礼貌的那个间接的各种就是问询呢，但是他都拒绝回答。
For decades, we Americans told ourselves fairy tales about how China was going to liberalize and democratize. I think she will, but how and at what cost is the question. Now we have stopped talking about liberalization and democratization. Our view is, well, that's just the way the Chinese are. They disappear people, they beat people up, they run a dictatorship. We have to accept this, not as a communist characteristic, but as a Chinese characteristic, if we are going to get along. So we say, okay, you know, you can have your prisoners, but it's okay because you're China.
所以10多年来呢，我们呢总是在那个告诉我们自己了，那么一个那个就是关于中国的神话，那就是中国呢最终会自由化，那么会民主化。那么我想呢，那么就是它一定会民主化，但问题是就是说怎么样民主化？那么在什么样的代价上实行民主化？这是我的一个关键的问题。现在呢，我们已经那个停止去那个去这样去想了。现在我们的观点是，哦，这就是中国人就是这个样子。那么他们呢让人去失踪，他们呢去那个打人，那么然后呢他们呢那个就是运作一个强硬的这个专制体系。我们呢必须的就是那个接受它。这不仅仅是一个共产主义的这个特征的问题，而这是中国特色。他说，因此呢，我们呢，如果要想给中国呢，能够真正的这个就是合作下去的话呢，那我们就必须得接受它。
As an American, I am deeply ashamed of this approach, which is both unrealistic and corrupt. But we are sitting in China's schoolroom, and I am confident that China's dictators will teach us the lessons that we need to know.
作为一个美国人呢，我是深深的感到就是为这个方法的这种方式啊羞耻。这不仅是不现实的，而且呢是非常腐败的。而且呢，我相信呢，我们其实就坐在中国的这个教室里边。那么我有非常那个就是强烈的自信呢。最后我会相信呢，就是中国的这个专制者了，那么会真正的会给我们一个很好的一个教训回来。那么这样的话呢，我们呢会这个就是知道这个教训的。
Democracy has been the key theme, the key word of Chinese history and politics for well over a century. It continues to be the key word. It cannot be stopped, though it can be persecuted and it can be delayed. I believe, and I know you all believe too, that in the end it will win. So thank you. Go ahead. Thank you all very much.
民主呢是中国过去1个世纪了，中国政治和中国历史的一个主题，而且我相信呢，它会继续如此。它是不可能被就是阻止的。而且呢，就是尽管呢他们可以被就是起诉，那么可以被推延，但是我相信呢，在座的各位呢，你们也相信呢，那么最后呢，那么民主会胜利。谢谢大家。
Do you want questions, or I just sit down?
Yeah, I'm thinking about, you can sit down, but I'm thinking about to ask some questions.
Sure, I'm happy to.
Okay, great. 因为尽管我们的时间呢有点超了一点，但是呢，我想呢就是利用这个机会了，那么我们可以向另外就是教授了问一些问题互动一下。对。
我想有问题。
Okay， 那你问一个问题。
My name is Qin Jin, one of the organizers for this conference.
Yes.
I'm very pleased to hear that you call a spade a spade.
Thank you very much.
I always like to have the opportunity to express my way to the U.S. government. I think you're wrong. You started wrong from 1940s.
Yes.
That lost China to the communist camp. That caused the Cold War, Korean War, Vietnamese War. I thought that was wrong of then Truman administration. 3 Johns, John Davis, John Service, and John Fairbanks. They ill-advised the American administration at that time. But now, since 1972, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger made a huge mistake, but it could be understandable because of the ally with China to contain Soviet Union. But after 1989, when the Soviet Union dissolved, the U.S. kept the same policy to China. So I always have this kind of wish that we can have an opportunity to express our way to the U.S. government. You're wrong, you should change. Otherwise, China could stay there forever, or for as long as they can. The Chinese government had already enjoyed at least 2 decades of a benign relationship, international relation, with the aid of the U.S. government, since George Bush, Senior Bush and Bill Clinton. I do not blame Junior Bush too much because he was too big to have two wars. So, all right, I wish. How can you help us to express our way to the government, and we will have a dialogue with Kissinger established.
Well,
in a couple of days.
First point, Kissinger has never been to Taiwan in his entire life. I would advise President Tsai to invite him to receive an honorary degree or something like that, and then we'll see what he does. I have asked about this, and he says I would have to consult my Chinese hosts. But this is ridiculous. How can you be a specialist and not even have? It's as if you were a specialist in France and Germany, but you don't live in France. I agree with what you say about American policy, and I will just add one thing: that in 1946, Chiang Kai-shek launched an offensive into Manchuria. And he used his very best troops, real soldiers who had been fighting the Japanese for years and years. And they smashed the communists. And the communists were retreating past the Sungari River, and they were going to go into the Soviet Union. At that point, Mr. Marshall, a very great man who knew nothing about China, said, "You have to stop, because you're violating a ceasefire." I think that if Marshall had kept his mouth shut, the communists would have their own little Red China up in the Soviet Union, and it probably would have gone down at the same time that the Soviet Union went down. But we have consistently misunderstood Chinese communism, and the results are, as you say. Now, I give courses on this, but what do you do now? China has a tremendous problem, which is that she cannot convince the world that her way is somehow desirable. Very, very few countries take China as their model. Very few say, well, we're going to get more advanced and we're going to be just like China. That's not what countries say. On the other hand, she can't really intimidate the whole world. She can't do that. What she's doing is making enemies. And I think that this is a sign of a very complex crisis in China. As for us, what we have to do is just keep talking, because our government is completely divided between people who say, no matter what China does, we have to be friends with them, and people who say, look, they are outliers. They are so unlike any other leading country in the world. They're rated less free than Russia. They're rated less free than Russia, which is also rated as unfree. The most important thing to do is keep speaking out, and I think that we should tell Obama or whoever, look, every time you meet or an ambassador meets a Chinese official, the first thing they should say is, here is our list of political prisoners in China.
Yeah.
What are you doing about it? Mm-hmm. And after you've answered that question, then we can go on to the business of the day. That is the opposite of the approach we take now. But we're coming now to a kind of decision point. So thank you very much.
我赶快就是给大家翻一下啊，当然基辛格根本不懂中国，那么他也从来没去过台湾，所以我建议呢，台湾呢应该来给他一个荣誉学位了，看他怎么样看。另外呢，当然美国在二战时期，尤其是马歇尔将军，伟大的将军，但是呢他在中国不了解中国，犯了一个错误，那么禁止蒋介石这边去剿匪。那么另外呢，我们该怎么办？那么其实美国政府呢经常是分裂的，那么有不同的声音。那么只要我们呢不断的讲述我们的观点呢，那么最后呢应该可以能够影响到美国政治。
Can I do some few words? Okay. Earlier, the professor mentioned the General Marshall. Actually, General Marshall has never been friendly to Chiang Kai-shek. I think majorly because he is colleague. General Stilwell has been very hostile to Chiang Kai-shek all the time. I think that influenced the General Marshall too.
No, Stilwell had a very poisonous effect.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for a while, he was thought to be right. However, the Chinese scholar Chen Jian, it always takes the Chinese to point these things out, has written books that have completely demolished all of this. But I agree with you. Stilwell was a huge problem.
对，马歇尔将军的观点呢，可能很多的程度上是受到史迪威将军的影响，因为史迪威是他的很好的部下。那么而且最近呢，中国有学者陈坚呢，已经呢揭示出这些。对，雪玲。
I share with Qin Jin the opinion that since the late 1940s, the American government has been making huge mistakes in its strategy in China. Once, twice, 3 times, and even for its own national interests, it's short-sighted. My question is, why? You said that we don't know China, don't know about China. Why could not we take the advice of those who love China?
Well, I can't answer that except to say that as John Fairbank, who was never my teacher, although I knew him very, very well, as he says, China is an ink blot. That is, it is one of these psychological tests where they show you an ink blot and they say, what does it mean to you? So people see in China what they want to see. And until 1980, there was no such thing as a tourist visa to China. So that means that from 1950 to 1980, we had no one went there except supporters of the regime. Now, our Consul General in Hong Kong, Edward Rice, and others knew perfectly well what was going on in China, and they wrote books that are still absolutely right. But if you look at World War II, the only reason we got involved in the European war was that Hitler declared war on the United States. Otherwise, it would have been a war with Japan. Roosevelt had very strange ideas about China because his mother's family had been drug dealers in China. So he thought that he understood China. If you look at the amount of aid that the United States gave to countries fighting in World War II, the amount of money that we gave to China is even smaller than the amount that we gave to France, which wasn't even fighting. There is I mean, you should write a book, or if I live along, I should write a book, but it's a great mystery. However, I would say one thing. The communists were very, very effective propagandists. And they lied.
Always.
I mean, they always lied. So that when Marshall left, he thought the problem in China was that Chiang Kai-shek was a dictator, but Mao was a democrat. And because Jiang would not accept the total democracy that Mao asked for, therefore there was a conflict. Well, that's completely wrong.
Exactly.
But our top person, now Roosevelt never sent anybody to China who knew anything about China at all. I mean, but it is true that someone like John Peyton Davies, he should know that. But this is all the past. What we have to look at is the future, and the future is coming at us faster than we would prefer and faster than Beijing would prefer. I'll just give the example of Hong Kong. Who would have dreamed after Hong Kong rejoined the motherland that 19 years later, something like 20% of the Hong Kong people, and overwhelming majority of the young people, want to be independent of China? Even I would not have believed that. But if you read the Chinese classics, they say, if you're a king, if you're a good king, people will move to your country.
Yeah.
If you're a bad king, people will leave.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in the Sishu.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. And Hong Kong is a good example.
雪莉问那个问题就是说，美国为什么会犯这错误？他说我也没办法解释，但是呢，就是说，费正清呢，我也很熟，但是我不是他的就是弟子，不是他弟子，是学生，是应该，但是不是他弟子，不是对不对？
我也不是他的学生，我是他的朋友。
朋友 ，OK， 对，那么当时呢，因为你知道，就是说长期来了，在80年之前呢，就没有到中国的这个旅游签证，那么只有就是那些完全支持政权的人呢，能够进入这个国家。对，那么当然了，现在就是说我们在那个香港啊，那么我们的这个总领事呢，他们呢也都很了解中国了，那么现在也都知道这个什么事情在发生。当时在这罗斯福时期呢，有个问题就是罗斯福他的妈妈的这个家族呢，因为跟中国呢这边走私鸦片了，好像他就觉得还能够理解中国。那么其实他们呢根本不理解中国，因为2战的时候呢，美国给中国的援助呢，其实还小于就是给法国的援助，而法国当时根本就没有给希特勒在打仗，对，没有抵抗。而就是当时他说，如果罗斯福还是非常奇怪，他说如果不是希特勒向美国宣战的话， 恐怕美国也不会向那个就是德国或者日本去宣战了。所以它这是一个当然是一个很大的一个问题，对，也很标准。
Thank you very much. I'm a scholar and human rights lawyer from China. And so I wrote something to criticize the appeasement policy adopted by American government. So I have a question that what's your view about the idea that delinking the human rights and business? And so how desirable and how possible to relink human rights and trade?
Well, I believe that policy is indivisible. We can't have one political policy and then another economic policy. So I believe, you see, in our government now, the Kissinger deeds, they're coming to an end because their ideas don't work anymore. So we're going to have to make changes. And I hope that when we do that, we reintegrate economics, human rights, following international treaties, behaving like a real country with China. What we have been enablers of China's entry into the world system without China agreeing to the rules that other countries play by. Not only that, think of how much foreign capital has gone to China. I was working on this, something like $2 trillion. $2 trillion in foreign money has been invested in China. Without those $2 trillion, I think the communist system would be having problems. So I particularly think that economics should be linked. The most important thing is that we have to make this a real issue. I saw the other day that in Tibet a convent had been bulldozed by the Chinese as part of their new anti-religious campaign, and that 3 Tibetan nuns had burned themselves to death. This wasn't even in the paper. I promise you that if the same thing had happened, say in France, and the government had knocked down a cathedral, and some of the clergy had committed suicide, that would have been on the front page. But we are Americans. Americans are willfully ignorant. I'll just give one example. During World War I, there were many secret treaties among the powers. United States cryptographers had translated all these treaties. So President Wilson knew exactly what the secret agreements were. But he paid no attention to this, and instead went to Versailles completely uninformed and made a complete mess, I have to say. I mean, we have problems today that are problems that go back to World War I. We Americans like to believe that we're somehow innocent. So with China, instead of listening to people, say, who lived there, let me just tell one quick story. Long ago, in the 1970s, a group of American journalists went to Fujian. And the local communists received them and said, well, of course, you know about the horrible things that happened during the Cultural Revolution in Fujian. And they said, no, we don't wait for that. And the communists looked at them and said, well, what's going on here? We know that the leader of the Red Guards in Fujian swam to Jinmen. And then he got to Taiwan. He was then interviewed by a very great American professor and his wife and others who are specialists in being sure that interviews are accurate. They do all kinds of consistency tests and so forth. Penguin Books, not unknown, published a book, this guy is a penling, called The Revenge of Heaven, which describes the horrors of the Cultural Revolution in Fujian. This Penguin book went through 2 editions. Lots of people read it. Yet here were these American journalists, they're all China specialists. They go to Fujian, and the Chinese say, "Are you telling us that you did not read this book? Well, what kind of journalists are you?" And they said, "Well, we didn't know this book." And the Chinese said, "What do you mean you didn't know this? It's a Penguin book. You know? It's a bestseller." And that's why I say the best deception is self-deception. Our people avoided reading or studying anything that did not agree with their views. You'll even see this with Kissinger when he was getting ready. The books he chose, the speakers he chose, they were all people who agreed with him. They weren't the real experts. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, because we have to control the time, and so now I'm not going to ask more questions, but I summarize 3 points. First is 对不起，我3点一个是美国的经济利益，美国这边有这个就是我们都知道有这么就是至少20亿的就是那个外资在那个中国了。那么第二个是美国人呢是完全是自愿的，就是对中国呢表示这种愚昧了，就不愿意去知道。他举了一个例子，就像那个企鹅出版社出版了一本那个就是天堂的这个
天仇，
天仇对，那么就是专门讲到就是福建的文革中的这个就是屠杀的。那么但是呢，美国的记者到了中国，那么然后告诉中国的接待的人呢，说我们从来不知道这个书，没有读过这个书，所以我们美国人很多根本不愿意去了解。另外一个，我们美国人很多根本就不关心。他比如说举个例子，西藏这边，那么最近那个中国政府了，那个摧毁了一个寺庙的中心，那么 maybe you can tell us what's the name？ 拉隆嘎那个，然后呢有3位就是尼姑了，那个就是自焚，但是呢，我们在这边呢根本就没有报道。试想一下，如果在法国，如果有法国政府，那么那个摧毁了一个天主教寺庙，有里边的神职人员如果自焚的话呢，世界会发生怎么样？那好，因为我们时间有限呢，所以我只有把这个就是 session 呢这个到此为止。So I have to give some time to our future panelists. But one thing is, I want to present a gift to our speaker because and let's whole